Welcome to this episode of Tea and Chi with my long lost cousin, John, a
Oh,
detox specialist, a former Buddhist monk. So, John, just go ahead and introduce yourself, a bit about who you are, what your mission on earth is, and a bit of your interesting history.
sure, yeah. And you got your tea there. I got my water with beet juice powder, so I'm just going to enjoy. My name is John Mueller. Used to be a Buddhist monk and professional substance abuse counselor, so that's kind of my claim to fame is, I got involved in psychology. I wanted to be a therapist, became a certified counselor. That's how I found out about a Buddhist temple that was nearby. Moved in when I was 25, became a monk, lived there for 5 years, became a meditation teacher, was given my own center to teach at for a full year. So that was the 6th year, was in Florida teaching for full time at a center. And so I've gotten quite good at guiding meditations and helping people. It became very formulaic. Teaching classes isn't just a matter of like, how good are you at teaching classes? There's also an aspect of holding space, entertaining people, designing the content in the first place, and then of course, delivering transformation. And from Buddhism, I feel that I'm working with extremely high quality, high level tools that I was able to internalize over the process of my first 5 years. And then the 6th year, of course, continuing to make progress, right? It's like when you're teaching every day, when you have to be on every day, when people see you as the example, and when you allow beautiful things to flow through you, I was making more progress that year than maybe any other year, right? And so I'm always on the path. And I just learned enough about how to help people using meditation and Buddhism that I realized I could do more with it than just teaching at a small local meditation center. And so that's when I started looking into online business. The tradition of Buddhism that I was part of is not, they have rules about a lot of things. And so I wasn't allowed to do like online teaching. And so that capped me at how many people I could reach and how much income I could earn. And so because of that, and also just really having a strong desire to start dating women again, because I was celibate for 5 years, I decided to just step away from it and just start dating, start a business, start all that stuff. And through lots of obstacles and roadblocks and tough times and breakthroughs, I've been able to actually have a functioning business for the last 2.5 years, maybe 3 years or so, about 3 years now. And yeah, it's actually been going good for the last 3 years. But before that, I was trying and I had something, but it wasn't enough. It was hardly enough to live on, like scraping by barely, with help. So that's kind of where I'm at. And so now I help my clients. I've kind of transitioned from helping people with explicit spiritual stuff to kind of helping the people who teach spiritual stuff to grow their businesses and get clients. And so I'm still helping people spiritually. And part of my job is to help to frame business building and wealth building spiritually, so that a spiritual person feels comfortable with it and they feel like, oh, this is actually in alignment with what I'm trying to do. This is not the antithesis of my spiritual growth. Like my business growth and my spiritual growth are the same thing. They're just two ways of talking about the same thing. And so that's a beautiful understanding when we can come to it. And I try to help people to see that.
So, what would you say are some of the ways in which Buddhism integrates money and how money operates in our life? Because from my personal study of Buddhism, out of all the world religions and different practices of spirituality that I've studied, Buddhism seems to bring in the money selflessly, like bring in the money, let it out. But in Tibetan Buddhism, there's the Jambalas, the wealth deities, and there's like a lot of focus on luck and wealth because it's a part of our life. So how would you say that Buddhism, both in modern Buddhism and ancient Buddhism, integrates the concept of money?
That's a good question. In my particular spiritual tradition, which is like modern Buddhism that comes from Tibetan Buddhism, we didn't actually focus on money that much. And so I learned a lot about it later. Like I learned about how to include my understanding of money later. All I learned from Buddhism about money was, well, a few things. So energetic principles of like, how do you create merit, right? So merit is a huge focus in Buddhism. How do you create good karma? And then how do you direct your good karma so that it ripens in particular ways? Mostly though, we tried to have it ripen towards spiritual goals. So in Buddhism, we would pray so that our good karma or merit would not ripen externally, so that it would only ripen as our spiritual realizations, because those are the only things that we get to keep forever. Whereas money, we can't keep forever. We lose it in this life, for sure. So that Buddhism teaches how do you create positive karma, how do you direct the flow of your positive karma, and it teaches amazing things about how do you become a more valuable person to the world, right? How do you become confident, right? These are things that are really important for earning money, like becoming valuable, being confident, being aligned, knowing how to create good karma and direct it. Those are pivotal to creating wealth, I would say.
Absolutely. I mean, I've looked at a lot of entrepreneurs in my life and seen how I've personally been able to expand my personal merit. And a lot of it has to do with confidence and soul self-love, you know, that oneness love, that you're loving yourself as a part of the ecology, as a part of the universal spirit, as someone capable of reaching a certain level of Buddhahood. So if you don't have that, then you have no foundation. And I've seen people like try to start something, and then the moment somebody slaps their wrist or says you're bad, or that's trash, or you're trash, they like fall into this emotional abyss.
That's right.
And like, the amount of times you and I have been like hated on is like, you got to be able to have the practices to survive that. So how would you say that Buddhism allows you to have that sort of inner centeredness, or Buddhist practices? What are some Buddhist practices that allow us to have that sort of centeredness, that stability, that strength?
Sure, yeah. So the main thing that I've gotten from Buddhism probably in this context is allowing principles to drive my life, like leading my life based on wise principles and not based on things that are unreliable. I don't let unreliable influences determine my direction. My direction is 100% determined by my decisions, and I like to base my decisions on wisdom principles, essentially principles that are taught to me by my mentors, in particular in Buddhism, we can say, and then I rely on those principles. And so one example of something that's completely unreliable is other people's opinions. And so, like,
I know that.
you know what I mean? Like people are going to have opinions that are positive towards us when we're doing things wrong, and they're going to have negative opinions towards us when we're doing things right. And so you can never know what to do based on how other people think, because people hated Buddha. Some people thought he was horrible. His cousin tried to kill him many times. Like people hated Jesus. They did kill him, right? So people who are doing good things are not always popular. And that shows that people's minds aren't always perceiving the truth. People perceive their own world, their own version of the world, in which we are just one little tiny piece of that, right, for them. And so, part of my training in Buddhism was kind of removing my care about what other people think, because it's not a reliable source of direction for me, right? I can care about somebody and want to help them, but I don't use what they think to base my direction on life. And if I really have faith in my principles, that I've decided for myself, I can lean on those heavily. And so that's how I handle when people throw things at me and they say stuff like, I'm just going based on principles. And I'm just like, I trust what I'm following and I have certainty of it. And once I step forward with it, I don't question it anymore. Like, we can question something, but then once we decide on it, we should just be all in. And so that's what I try to do with that.
That's a powerful practice from Buddhism that a lot of people experience about that going within. So something that I've learned relatively recently is that as humans, we think other people's thoughts and we feel other people's emotions. I always knew that I could kind of read people what they're thinking about, but definitely I always knew that I could read people's emotions, what they're feeling. But people don't know how to turn that off, mainly because of ego. And that's another lesson of Buddhism, to get rid of the ego. It's because people don't think their mind is a network. People think it's a singular pink sponge that's pumping blood and keeping you alive, but your brain is a network connecting to all beings. So when you have that network running with loads of information from all over the place, there's no peace for you. Because even if people in your environment are saying a bunch of good things, it's overload. It's like running 10,000 computers through one computer.
Yeah.
So learning to think your own thoughts and feel your own feelings, still listening to others, but not allowing the sort of chaos of people's undisciplined minds to come through energetically into your mind. So what would you say in meditation for modern life is a practice that maybe you've learned that ancients didn't even practice because maybe they didn't have computers, they didn't have the situations that we have?
What about meditation have I learned in relation with modern life, you're saying?
Yeah, something that modern Buddhism would be a practice of that in ancient times wouldn't be relevant or wouldn't be useful, but is now very useful.
I can think of a lot of things that are not useful about modern life for meditation, mostly technology and busy schedules, right? In ancient times, people didn't have such busy schedules, I don't believe, and their lives were more simple. They were not so complex and they were not so entwined with technology, right? Our mind becomes like what we focus on. And so if we're focused on social media, it's a sea of distraction, right? And it just creates open loops constantly in our mind, and we consume things that are just not spiritually nourishing, and we get hooked on those things. So I feel that a modern day meditator needs to learn to interface with technology with boundaries. They need to put actual clear boundaries on their technology and on their busy schedules, because those are traps that will pull you in and make meditation very difficult. I would say that meditation is very similar now than it was before. Like, I don't think the actual technology of meditation, like the style of meditation, I don't think that has changed. I think that it's become considerably harder due to those two things. But also a third one is like pollution, actually. Pollution and the negative sort of energy in the air, in the ether that is created from pollution makes it harder to gain spiritual realizations. It makes it harder to focus. It's hard to have a pure mind. And so there's a lot of things stacked against a modern day meditator. And so we need to learn how to handle those things. So that's why, things like caring for your body, like specifically, like a modern day person needs to like do more explicitly to like cleanse their body and go out into like a pure nature and get away from technology, unplug, like forget about your schedule and your time I believe that we all need to have at least one day a week where we're not on anybody else's schedule and there's nothing on our schedule. Where we just have a day where there's literally zero schedule, because we need to give ourselves permission to forget about time for a while so our mind can sort of unwind and expand. And yeah, I think that it's quite challenging.
Absolutely. It's very interesting what you were saying about the dynamic of pollution.
Yeah.
So that dynamic of pollution is this thing that we all know about, but nobody's really um, contemplating it. Like as you have just contemplated it and digested it and described it in a form that is relevant in modern times. But I've seen the result of a lot of people that are taking positive steps of just like everything's super healthy now because there's uh, microplastics in the water. There's heavy metals in the air and the rain. So it's like we're kind of, as modern meditators, meditating in an ecological apocalypse. To not put it lightly, is kind of where we're at right now, depending on how things move forward. But also, I really loved what you were saying about the technology because a modern meditator has to have great discipline with their technology. Because if you are feeding into the matrix, you're constantly on this phone just intaking a bunch of BS. Ancient times, that wasn't something that would even happen. Like you would be in your village and what you knew was your village and what you've read about and what people have told you about. There wasn't all this information from all over the world, but nowadays it's also all over the cosmos. There's people talking about space and there's people talking about other planets and other beings from other planets and other ideas that have never been really talked about publicly on this grand scale before. So
It's true. There's one more thing though. So as I said, our mind becomes like what we focus on. And, people are talking about, 5D and 12D and stuff like, and so we can say 3D is the normal experience of like a human and an animal, I would say. But like when we focus on a screen, our mind becomes 2D. Our mind becomes two-dimensional, right? So we're actually devolving the more we focus on screens. And so someone in the olden days, even though they still had distractions and they were drunk idiots at the bar talking about nonsense, like, yeah, there were things that were not helpful and distracting at all times, but at least they were 3D at their minimum. And so it was easy to like open up and receive. Like for now, we have to like getting into nature and becoming 3D is actually evolution for a lot of us, in my opinion. Those who look at screens and then they go outside, they actually evolve into a 3D mind before they even get to anything higher than that. So anyway, that's my opinion. I think screens are very devolving for the mind, and I use them. I'm not saying I don't use them. I just think that it's hard to meditate if you're looking at screens.
that's a really powerful point for modern meditation practice because a lot of people think that all this mental stimulation is evolving us. But in reality, what you described is definitely devolving us. And personally, I have to add all these extreme practices just to make sure my body's still operating in a natural and supernatural way. Like just yesterday, I'm going rock hounding on the mountain and carrying a backpack full of 50 pounds of rocks just so my body doesn't devolve into a matrix, into a screen. And you're so right. People are talking about, oh, 5D, fluffy love and light. But if you're on the phone all day, which sometimes I am, and I'm pretty disciplined and have a lot of willpower, but utilizing also our imagination is huge. And I know with Buddhist practices, a lot of it is visualization, imagination. But if we're on the screen all the time, we're kind of putting something in between our third eye or our consciousness. In China, they believe that the heart is the consciousness.
Yeah,
So
Buddhism.
what, yeah, go ahead.
No, yeah, Buddhism also says that the heart and the mind are essentially like the same thing. The mind is mostly located in the heart. Anyway, just agreeing with that point.
Absolutely. So, what would you say is a visualization or a meditation practice, any practice from Buddhism that could help people to tune in to more of their own consciousness rather than a mechanical or computerized consciousness?
Okay, good question. Yeah, so I guess the most fundamental visualization in Buddhism is visualizing Buddha in front of us. And so, in my opinion, the best way, like as you said, we share consciousness, right, with those who are around us, but we can consciously add in enlightened beings and start sharing their consciousness as well. And so that's like a shortcut practice for someone who wants to like make very fast progress in meditation. Just mix your mind with people who are already enlightened, like enlightened beings. And so you can do that by inviting them into your space. So you imagine that Buddha comes in front of you and all around him are all the other enlightened beings. And Buddha directly said that whenever anyone visualizes me with faith, I'm there. And so we believe he's really here, that then you would do your meditation practice in his presence for the sake of all other living beings. And that's like a very essential, like basic way to get started. And you can take it a step deeper by imagining that all the enlightened beings dissolve into Buddha, Buddha dissolves into light and dissolves into your heart. And that your mind at your heart mixes completely with Buddha's mind. And that you become inseparable. And then you just always remember that he's with you in your heart. And that's like the most beautiful practice. It's very simple, but it's very powerful. And obviously that practice will gain power the more and more you have a relationship with Buddha and the more you have faith in him. And that comes over time, right? That comes through listening to teachings on anger and peace and attachment and wisdom and being like, oh, he's got something here. And you put it into practice. You're like, oh, this worked. Over time, you start developing a relationship with this person. And then those practices of visualization become very real and very powerful.
It's interesting when you were talking about that particular practices of enlightening, bringing in the enlightened beings, bringing in the Buddhas. The first being I thought of was when I met Ram Dass. And also one of the teachings that he taught was that exact Buddhist technique of inviting in one of the Buddhas. I remember him teaching specifically the medicine Buddha or the blue Buddha, the Buddha of healing, and just visualizing that Buddha inside you and the feeling of that Buddha until it becomes bigger and bigger until it's the whole consciousness of everything. And I just remember when I met Ram Dass, it was like meeting somebody with good vibes, and you just like crank the good vibes all the way to the as high as it goes. And I wasn't even like a huge fan. I liked his work, I liked his talks and his stuff, but it wasn't until I met him and like basked in his presence, I was like, oh, I get it. I get what this guy, his merit. You could feel like how much love he's poured out into the world, and this hierarchy of like, all right, here's where you're at, and here's where this elder is at, this foundational elder who's already studied so much and experienced so much that you could kind of say like, oh wow, thank you for reminding me to keep working to keep working towards that, because it's like huge. I don't know if anyone watching this has ever experienced like being in the presence of a true guru, but that was like just being near him. And also my Reiki master and other people in my life, my Lomi Lomi teacher, Gina Nalawai in Hawaii, Hawaiian powerful healer, just like being with these people, just like that meditation. If you don't have those physical people, you can invite them in spiritually. But if you have those physical people, do that practice with them.
Yeah, the physical ones are the bridge to all the rest usually.
Mm.
You need a real physical mentor who you know personally and you can ask questions to. It's like an interface. In Buddhism, it's called the interpretive spiritual guide because they're like your interpreter for the higher consciousness. And we can't commune directly with this higher consciousness usually. We need an interface. Yeah, and we can create karma directly with them. So yeah, if you have, I agree with you. If you have personal teachers, physically embodied, they're the bridge, they're the key for you. And yes, I spent many years developing relationships with real teachers. I lived at the meditation center with my spiritual guide for 5 years, and I learned so much from him. And I had other teachers too, but I regarded him mentally as my spiritual guide, and I would, as you said, bring him into my heart. And yeah, he was my father. He's my spiritual father, and it's you can't comprehend. It's incomprehensible how much meaning is brought to my life, and yeah, it's the only way to practice. There's no other way to make progress, in my opinion, than doing that.
So we got about 10 minutes left. If anyone has any questions, we have a little bit of an audience today. If anyone has any questions, feel free to ask a question to me or John. Otherwise, we'll keep blabbing away for the last 10 or
Well,
so.
I prepared something because you wanted to talk about money too. So
Oh, yeah.
if you want, I
Sure.
prepared a couple like special phrases that have helped me with like abundance consciousness. And some of them are directly related to Buddhism and some of them are not. Is that cool if I share some of those? Because I think,
Absolutely. I'm sure that's going to be a question for a lot of people anyways. Everybody's trying to get that money.
yeah, well, it's part of this topic too, I think, right? Um, so two people at one time told me the same exact thing, but they didn't even know each other. And it was a time where I needed this advice. And I realized when they said it that I wasn't thinking this way. And I decided to adopt it, and it changed everything for me. For me, this, what I'm about to share, kind of gave me the foundation of abundance consciousness, like to enough to build on. So I didn't keep falling below. There's like trap doors sometimes, and we just keep falling lower and lower. Like this gave me like at least some sort of a ground. So what they said was, they're like, I knew that I was always going to be okay, that the universe was going to give me whatever I needed. And literally two people, one who had become a millionaire twice, he lost a lot of it in the real estate thing of 2008 and 9, made over $1 million again. And then someone else who had just kind of married into abundance, they both were affluent, and they both told me the same thing. I'm always going to be okay. The universe will give me whatever I need. And when I realized, like, I'm not doing that. I literally didn't think that way. I was thinking that I wouldn't always be okay, and the universe may not give me whatever I needed. And I decided to just start believing it, and it gave me enough of a ground to like build on. And when you have that sort of faith, you can make moves that are going to be more successful than if you don't have it, in my opinion. So that was the main.
That's a really beautiful synchronicity with one of the greatest mantras that I've learned in meditation is I was in this really deep state and I was connecting with the forces of nature, and Mother Nature, clear as day, she was like, nature will provide always. Nature will provide always. And that's something missing from a lot of people's lives is nature's provision. Like you could throw some seeds in your backyard. Herbs are like one of the easiest things you could possibly grow. You could go into your local wilderness if you have it and forage, and like not only is that giving you sustenance, but it can become part of your business if you trade that herb with somebody who wants that herb, or you trade that energy in some sort of form. But yeah, and it also leads me to something that I was pondering today is ingratitude is like when two magnets repel each other for what your heart desires in life. When you're not grateful, and this is huge in meditation, is integrating gratitude. When you're not grateful, it's like life's like, okay, you're not ready for that huge gift. But when you're deeply grateful, that's the magnet. That's the correct polarity. It's like, I'm already grateful for gifts that I haven't even received yet, and then they come in. But a lot of people are stuck in that ingratitude. And especially in relationships, they're like, oh, I'm not grateful. And then the person goes away and then they try to flip the magnet and go, no, 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 come back.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I hear you. I think a lot of things in relationships and attracting money are very similar. And yeah, I definitely noticed that. Okay, do you want me to keep going a little bit with I have a bunch of these little I know maybe we can't cover all of it, but
yeah, we got about 8 minutes left. Go for it.
okay. And so for me, in Buddhism, it teaches that unless the ego is involved, it's not negative. So actions are not negative unless the ego is involved. And you can't really tell from the outside if there's an ego involved or not, right? Like I could walk down the street full of ego or not full of ego, right? And there's some relative degree in all of us, right? Or I'll speak for myself, but basically like whatever you do, you could go to the bar and have a drink for the benefit of others with pure intention, with like, you know, not being from ego, or you could go to your friend's birthday party with bearing a gift full of ego, right? It doesn't really matter what it is on the outside, but the action's negative if there's ego involved, and it's not negative if there's not. And so that understanding has helped me to understand that I can grow my business, I can create wealth, I can make money, and as long as there's no ego involved, it's not negative. And so that has helped me to have confidence that this is a very valid path, and that of course I have to watch my mind to see if there's ego or not and try to reduce it and all that stuff. But that's what meditation is. I'd have to do this no matter what I was doing, right? If you bring ego into meditation, your meditation can actually increase your ego if you don't do it properly, right? And so bringing ego into spiritual practice, people do that all the time. They get their malas and they wear them around their neck and they have this spiritual persona, and it's just ego, but it looks spiritual, but it's actually stinking horrible ego, right? And so the practice, no matter what we're doing, is to try to recognize and reduce our ego as much as we can, and try to increase our love and our positivity, our happiness, our care for others as much as we can. And you can do that in a business or not in a business. You can create lots of wealth, or you can be broke, or something in between. Doesn't matter. The inner task is the same, and the outer task is just an arena to practice the inner practice. And so that understanding gives me confidence that I can practice my business without any negativity being created, if I'm mindful.
And that's such a key factor in being attuned to oneness, because oneness doesn't see things in good or evil. Oneness is just self-regulating and balancing the universe for our mutual eventual enjoyment. So you have like rock stars are a perfect example of what I was thinking when you were talking about, is your ego involved or not? You see loads of rock stars that just blow all their money on drugs and alcohol or whatever. And then you have like Earth, Wind, and Fire, which if you listen to their interviews, they're like, we created this band because the world needed love and we wanted to unify our brothers and sisters in the world. And then they just like went quadruple platinum and they got all this wealth, but it wasn't from like, oh, I'm doing this just to rock and roll, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. It was like pure intention, as you were describing.
For sure. I look to Bruno Mars. I think he shows a good example of like how to benefit others with your music, and how to not get the ego involved. But that's just kind of a side note. And so if someone were to ask me, how do you reduce the ego, or how do you make sure that you do something without ego, it's kind of a complicated process that I don't have time to explain. Like, how do you identify and reduce the ego is a big process. But what I can say is, if you do something to improve yourself and to help others, you are most likely not going to have the ego involved, right? So improving the idea to improve yourself, obviously that could involve ego, but like, if you actually want to improve like your true self, like your pure potential, your spiritual potential, you want to improve that, you want to help others in a pure way, that motivation makes it positive. It makes what you're doing positive, and there's less of a chance of ego coming in. And the other thing, that I've thought of, and this is, I think, in common with relationships, is at some point we have to realize that, we just got to work with what we have. Like, we're not perfect. I'm not perfect. Like, what am I going to do? Sit in a cave my whole life?